Yo, so I got to share some big news with you guys. We're moving. After 5.5 years here in Mexico and 4 years in our current home, it's time for a change. We originally signed a 2-year lease and extended it for 2 more years, but now we're ready for something new. Over the years, I've learned a lot about renting in Mexico, the do's, the don'ts, and the little details that make all the difference. We're gonna get into the tips of renting a house in Mérida, Mexico and not spend a ton of unnecessary money. I've actually never shown this house before other than the garden and the story couch in my casita. If you're curious about what this house looks like, let me know in the comments below and I'll shoot a video once it's empty. The first thing I want to do is just kind of talk about some of the differences between renting a house here in Mexico versus the United States. First of all, there are no credit checks. And in fact, normally when most people arrive, you don't have any type of credit history in Mexico because your US credit means nothing here. So people expect for you to either show up with multiple deposits. Normally that involves the first month's rent, a security deposit, which is equal to the first month's rent, and a third deposit if you don't own property or have someone that owns property called an avail to vouch for you. So you're looking at 3 times whatever the rental amount is just to start to move in. But that's not it. You also have the contract fee. So those are the 4 fees that are typical when renting a property here. And the contract fee can be anywhere from a couple of $1,000s, I'll say $7,000 to $10,000, depending on the rent of the property. Now, let's talk about the lease. Here, it's not typical to have a lease agreement. Normally, there's an occupational agreement or contract. So the contract will state that you, the occupant, can occupy the property. You don't own it. You are an occupant of the property for the amount of time specified in that contract. So if it's a 1-year contract, you can occupy the property for 1 year. If it's a 2-year contract, you can occupy the property for 2 years. Now, at the end of that, you also agree to give the property back to the owner who has full rights of the property. One of the cool things about Mexican law is that during that time of that contract, no one can enter your property, not the landlord, not the police, not anybody without warrants and things of that nature. The flip side of that you're the occupant, is that the landlord expects for you to kind of do a lot of the maintenance of the house. Unlike in the States, I've been a homeowner in the States since I was 19 years old. I'm 50. And I've owned multiple homes and been a landlord several times. And in the States, if something happens with the house, typically the landlord was responsible for those things unless it was negligence or something like that from the tenant. Here, a lot of the maintenance of a home falls on the responsibility of the tenant. Now, a really good landlord, which we'll talk about the characteristics of a good landlord in just a bit, a good landlord will handle a lot of the maintenance as it is the infrastructure of the house. So those are some of the big difference between renting in Mexico and renting in the States. So my first tip for you, because of those things, is to start slow. Take your time. Don't get too overexcited about finding a place. When you arrive, I recommend that you book a short-term Airbnb or hotel for at least a few weeks. You want to give yourself time to explore all the different areas of the city and see what living in those areas actually feels like. People are often pressured to think that homes are going to go really fast or that the property won't be available. I can tell you that that's not necessarily the case. I've seen homes sit for rent for months and months and months. I've also seen homes sit for sale for many years. It's just a very different market here. Typically, homes are owned outright by the owners. So they don't have the pressure of a mortgage or anything like that over their heads for them to have to rent it. When it comes to finding the best homes, you're better off exploring neighborhoods and calling the numbers of the houses that you see for rent. Many homes are not on websites or Facebook pages. There's no central MLS system here in Mexico or in Mérida. And so you are going to find better properties dealing direct with the agents representing the owner. And a lot of times those are just signs on the properties themselves. That's the best way to find it. Also, when you go to look at homes, the homes might be in disrepair or very, very dirty if it's been vacant for a long amount of time, right? There'll be bugs on the floor, it'll be dirty, etc. And that's not uncommon here. Don't be discouraged by how a house might look if it's been vacant for a long time. Typically, those things are resolved before you move in. The rental process here is more like buying a home, and there's even a formal closing at a notary's office. So it's a serious process. You sign contracts, you hand over a ton of money, and once you hand that money over, it's very difficult to get any money back here in Mexico. So slow down and breathe a little bit and take your time. My number 2 tip is to tell you, spend some time in the area before signing or handing over any money. Once you've identified an area that you want to be in, I look for houses that say se renta or, that are for sale or whatever in that particular neighborhood. You also want to drive that neighborhood at night and see what the noise levels are like. Are there any barking dogs? You want to go early in the morning if possible to see where the roosters are. You want to go and see if there's any bars on the weekends. You want to know if that street floods during a heavy rain. And most importantly, if you work from home and you're a remote worker back in the States, you need to know what internet service you can get at that house. It's very difficult to fix bad internet once you get into a place. I know many families that have moved to a home and the landlord has promised, oh, the internet's good. Well, the internet's good for them because they're not working remote. But when they get to the home, they're scrambling, trying to figure out an alternative solution because fiber optic is available on their street, but not at their house. Or all they can get is radio antenna internet. So those things are very, very important. The good news is Starlink is available and Starlink provides a decent internet speed for most cases, but it's something else you want to avoid if you don't have to have it. All right, the third tip that I'm gonna give you is probably the most important tip. The landlord is the most important part of a rental. You might find the best house in the world, but if it has a bad landlord, run. Do not rent that home. You may wonder, how can you tell about the landlord? What are some of the tips that you can give me to identify a good landlord? One thing I can tell you, it's not just about liking them personally, liking the landlord personally. It's about how they treat the property and how they're going to respect you as a tenant. I'll give you some examples. When I went to look at the new house that we're moving to, from the very moment we walked to the front door, I could see that the door had some weather issues and things of that nature. The very first thing that the realtor said to me was that the landlord had planned to have the door painted and fixed. Great, that was awesome. From the very first moment, I can tell that the landlord cared about the property just because he was already planning to take care of maintenance items. Typically, what happens is a house will sit in disrepair until that first security deposit is given, and then the landlord will start fixing stuff. From the time that I contacted the realtor to the time we first saw the house, work was going on the house. I know because I drove around and looked at the house and I could see people coming and fixing things. I could see bags of things that were left in the house out on the street. I could see all of this, right? So work was happening even before I gave the landlord any money. He was already fixing the things in the house. That's one good sign. You can tell just by conversations and things of that nature if they care about their property. One of the mistakes that I made many years ago is when I moved into this place, I did all of the deposits and I gave my landlord almost 100,000 pesos. We had our furniture coming and it was set to arrive and the place was dirty. So I then had to go and spend additional money to get this place fixed up into shape where we could at least move our furniture and it wasn't moving it into a place that was disheveled. That was a bad indicator of how things were going to play out over the next couple of years. And to be honest with you, the reason that we're moving is just the house has not been maintained and I got tired of spending my money to fix things in this house. It's not worth it. One of the things that I do pretty rarely is just look at rentals. Even when I'm not looking, I'm looking for rentals and seeing what the market bears, right? Seeing what the rents are going for particular houses in different areas of the neighborhood that I might be interested in. So I knew realistically that I could pay the same or less at a different property that was being maintained versus staying at this house. Typically in the contract, you get 30 days from the time you initiate the contract to figure out any problems. And then after that, they really expect most of the maintenance to be on you, unless it's a major system issue like with the infrastructure of the house. The one thing I will tell you is that that's all negotiable. You can write into the contract what you want to have, who's responsible for what. And I would recommend that you have put into the contract who's responsible for what. Obviously, if things are not maintained and you break them, or you're responsible for them, breaking, then you should repair them and replace them. But if things fail because they were just not maintained, then the landlord should have some responsibility for that. Now you've identified a place, you've identified that the landlord is someone you want to work with and enter into a relationship with. The next thing you need to do is to place your security deposit. And when you put down a security deposit, I would definitely say have a lawyer write a small contract for you that says this security deposit is contingent upon you actually signing a contract with a notary, right? So if for some reason you guys don't agree to terms in terms of who's responsible for what or whatever, then have that money returned to you within 7 days of giving it up. Make sure that you feel very comfortable, or even wait until handing over that security deposit until you have all of your terms agreed in the contract. Tip number 4 is make sure you understand the contract. This contract is a signed legal document that's placed on file with the state by a notary. A notary in Mexico is a little bit beyond a normal lawyer here. They're state appointed, and they're actually able to, handle real estate transactions and certify that the things that are in this document are legal, and they're going to put them on file with the state. You sign this contract at an attorney's office or a notary, and that contract is independent of the payments. So normally you won't find any language in the contract, in the occupancy contract, about the amount for the rent or anything like that. It'll just be the date and the time that you're able to occupy the property, and any other terms or clauses inside of that about who's responsible for what and things of that nature. You will also sign promissory notes, right? So those are your rent payments. So if it's for 2 years, you'll sign 24 promissory notes in the amount of the monthly payment. So that's something separate of the contract. Keep in mind, for any of this to be legal, it all has to be in Spanish. So you need to make sure you understand perfectly clear exactly what you're signing. What I recommend, if you're not fluent in Spanish, is to hire a lawyer and take them with you to the closing so they can look over the lease and explain it to you in English so that you know exactly what's happening. The notary is really there, and that contract is really there for the protection of the landlord and not necessarily for the tenant. So there may be things in that contract that you don't agree with or that you want to negotiate, and it's up to you to be able to explain what that is and have that put into legal language. And so I hired an attorney to review my contract and to tell them exactly the things that I wanted to see in that contract. You're paying for that contract, by the way. You're actually responsible for paying that contract. And just a little known fact is part of that contract money is split between the notary and the real estate agent or the owner. So sometimes I've heard people paying an amount of the contract fee equal to the rent, which is crazy. But I guess it depends on how much the rent is. So these things should not cost 20 and 30,000 pesos. They should be, under 10,000 pesos for sure. But as a tip for the contract, you need to understand it in Spanish. Make sure you have someone representing your interests, whether that's a lawyer, or have the document sent to you ahead of time. The draft document sent to you ahead of time so you can review it, make changes, and then send those back so that they can be put into the final contract. That's what I did, and I actually took a printout of those changes that my lawyer made and compared it to the contract, although I can read Spanish, but I wanted to make sure that the language and the things that I asked for were in the final contract and what we agreed with the owner once he reviewed the contract as well. Actually, so the new house we're moving to is in the same neighborhood, and I've actually talked about that house in a previous video. So I will leave it up to you to search those videos and guess which house it is. This could be a cool little game that we play. Hint, it's in one of the neighborhood tour videos. If you've got any questions or want more details about our move, drop me a comment below. I hope this video was helpful. Do me a favor, hit that thumbs up so other people that are looking for this type of content can find it. And until next time, MexitPlans Monty, I'm out.